It says one night, here it is, Joseph had a dream. Some of you got to get a dream. And when he told his brothers about it, here it is, they hated him more than ever. They didn't hate him for being smart. They hated him because he had a dream. He said, listen to this dream. He said, we were out in the field tying up bundles of grain, and suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. And his brothers responded, so you think you're going to be our king, do you? Well, do you actually think you're going to reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked. When Joseph's brothers, they looked out and they see him coming. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. And as he approached, they made plans to kill him. He said, listen, guys, listen, I know we're not hitting it off great. Dad got me this new bedazzled jacket, and it looks real good. But on top of that, I feel like God put this dream in my heart. And he had this dream that he said that there was this one sheath that was standing there in the field, and then the other 11 just bowed down in front of it. Man, isn't that awesome? And immediately, they set up in their minds like, oh, you got to be the one that's standing while we all bow down. And they began to hate him. They made a plot to kill him. And then they started talking, and they said, listen, we can't kill him. We don't want that blood on our hands, but we've got to kill the dream. I can't stand the dream. Because listen, if you're not working on getting better, you'll get bitter. Okay, so they look at him and they're bitter at the fact that he wants better in this life. And so they're judging him and they're ridiculing him. In fact, people dissatisfied with their place in this life will always try and put you in yours. And so they say, listen, we're going to kill him. And then one of the brothers speaks up and says, listen, we can't, I don't want that blood on my hands. Look, in the distance, there is a band of Ishmaelites. This was actually, if you go back a couple of generations, a cursed people. And they said, we'll sell him into slavery, and at least we'll tell Dad he's dead, but we won't actually kill him so we don't have that blood on our hands. And they sent him off to what they had no idea what the fate would be for their dreamer brother Joseph. I remember when I first got saved, I remember that moment. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. In fact, we grew up in the biggest, really honestly, hot mess of a situation that you can think of, and very dysfunctional, very abusive, very just all kinds of problems. And I didn't grow up in the church, and so I had a dream for my life, but all of my dreams were centered around how to get me out of there. And then one day, I walked into this church. It was a church plant, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know churches could start. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. And then they told me it was meeting in a high school. I'm like, oh, that's a cult. But how many of you know, hey, if you get lonely enough and you try enough different options, a cult sounds like a great deal. Like, oh, yeah, I'll go to your cult. I'll try it. I walked into this high school, and I found out this pastor, he said something. And I'll never forget, and I've probably said it 20,000 times in the 16 years since. He said, you were made on purpose and for a purpose. Nobody had told me that. And then he said, and God has plans for your life. And his plans for you are good. And I remember that day in that church, it was in a high school, in the back of an auditorium. I was sitting in the very back row in the corner. And I remember I prayed. I said, God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. Wherever you want me to go, I'll go. However you can use a man, whatever gifts you can put on one man's life, I'll take them. Whatever you could do through a family, you can do it through mine. God, I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything. And all of a sudden, I had this new dream for my life. And every day since then, the devil, and sometimes some of his favorite people, have been trying to take the dream. You see, you got to understand there are three people in this life when it comes to the dream. There are people that are in the game. They're in the game. They're working it. Pastor Stephen's one of those guys. He's in the game. He's trying to make a difference. He rolled up his sleeves. He got a vision for a church, and he's working it. He's in the game. And in Genesis 37:19, they could see it. They knew it was him because they say, here comes the dreamer. I wonder who would say of you in this life, and they look at the way that you live, would anybody say, here comes the dreamer? I want people to say, hey, listen, with his with his experience, like honestly, with his gifts, he should never have done the things he's done. But look, here he comes. Here comes the dreamer. You can't stop him. I want people to say about that about me, but I wonder how many would say that about you. Like, I wonder if they say, no, there goes the guy that's making it Monday through Friday. Barely. Who's got some kids that he doesn't necessarily like and a wife that he hasn't talked to all that much lately. And that he's surviving, barely. See, God made you to be a dreamer, church. He made you for that thing, that moment where you said, God, whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to go, I'll go. And so my prayer is today that when you would leave here, that God would begin to reignite the flame of the dream in your life. So there's three people in the room. There's people that are in the game, okay? And I would even say it in this way. Then there's people that hate the game. You know them? Don't look at them if they're sitting in here. Don't elbow them if you're married to them. They're dream killers. Look at verse 20. They said, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns, a big well, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. The honest truth is that there are people in your life and there are people in my life that because they've lost their dream, they resent your dream. They'll constantly remind you of the things that you're not good at. You tell them about the business that you want to start so that you could take resources and funnel it into the kingdom. Or you tell people about the small group that you want to lead, and they immediately remind you of all the mistakes that you've made. You talk about the leadership that you want to begin to display in your home or in your family, and then they remind you of all the mistakes that you used to make. Hey, ladies, let me give you a tip. When your man finally starts to show up to church, and he's finally coming, and then one day after 6 months, we're sitting at the dinner table, and he finally says, hey, could I pray? Don't remind him of the 10 years he didn't pray. Praise God for the moment that he's bowing his head and thanking Jesus for what he's doing in his life today. That there's a lot of situations where the devil hasn't had to get involved in crushing your dream because the people in your circle are doing it already. And so I want dream elevators in my life. I don't want dream killers. Here's the reality. Joseph didn't get thrown in a pit and thrown into slavery because he had a dream. Joseph got thrown in a pit and sent into slavery because the only people he had in his life to share the dream with were small-minded, simple-thinking people. Just imagine what would have happened and the journey of his life, how it would have been different if he would have said, hey guys, let me tell you about my dream. And they would have sat back and said, we need to figure out how to make you king. He didn't spend 13 years of his life in a prison and in slavery for having a dream. He spent 13 years of his life in prison for having a dream and having no great-minded people to share it with. Albert Einstein said it in this way. I love this quote. He said, great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. I would even say it in this way. Let me see if I can say it. Yeah, I'll say it because I'm going to get on a plane later and go home. Listen, if every time a dream comes up, if your first reaction is an objection, man, we need to check our spirit that we might be the dream killer in somebody's life. Hey, I told my wife one time, I said, hey, listen, babe, sometimes I'm just going to come to you and I'm just going to say some stuff. It might just be total nonsense. But don't tell me all the ways it can't work. I need to be able to dream. I need to be able to dream. Man, if you can't dream in your house, fellas, you can't dream anywhere. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. And small minds discuss people. Eleanor Roosevelt. He said, come on again. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. And small minds discuss people. So we got people that are in the game. They're dreaming, they're trying. And listen, I want that for every person in the room. We got people that hate the game. But then we got people that quite honestly, and especially as I look around the country, like even in the local church today, that are just watching the game. You just watch. You are up in the stands. You are not on the offense, and you are not on the defense. You are sitting in the stands waiting for somebody else to carry out a dream that you can come experience later, enjoy later. They looked at him and they finally said, hey, look, we're not going to kill him. We're just going to spectate. They said, let's throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness, and then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. James would say, anyone who knows the good that you ought to do and doesn't do it, he said, that's a sin. He said, we can't afford any longer for a bunch of spectators. He said, you got to get down out of the stands, get down on the field, and start playing on the offense. So how do we chase a dream? The reality is, I need you to understand something. There's nothing that we lose that we'll lose as long as we keep the dream. There's nothing that the devil of hell can take away from you if you remember the dream, if you remember that thing. So let me ask you this question in this way. It's not in your notes. It's not on a screen. But if time, if money, education, experience, current commitments weren't an issue, all the things, all the reasons, all the dream killers, all the excuses that the devil creeps up into your brain about why you can't do something great, if they weren't an issue and you were guaranteed not to fail, what would you do? You know what's so sad? Of the thousands of people I've sat across coffee tables with and asked that question, I've never had somebody ever look back to me ready for the answer. Because something happened in your life where you thought the goal was to survive it. And the goal for God, God's best for your life isn't that you survive this life. You won't. The death rate is still at 100%. His goal for your life is while you're here to be a devil-killing, world-changing, dream chaser. Live your life in such a way that every morning when your feet hit the ground, the devil says, oh crap, he's up again. Here he comes. Y'all get ready. So how do we chase a dream? Look, the reality is when I watch marriages quit, I see people that gave up on the dream. You remember when you were holding her hand that day? You said, I'll do anything for you, baby. I love you forever. When I see parents that give up on their kids, they left the dream. When I give guys that give up on careers or you were going to make a difference for God, you were going to serve in the local church, you were going to do something great, and then you quit on it. You hit an obstacle, you hit a road bump, and then you went to the sidelines. How do you chase a dream? I'm going to give you 5 thoughts today in the little bit of time that we have together to try to help you figure out how to go chase down a dream. The first thing is you've got to find the right friends to share it with. Listen, I'm the biggest proponent of small groups in the history of the world because I realized on the day that I gave my life to Jesus, I didn't have anybody in my circle that would understand the value of spending the rest of your life chasing down somebody that was near to us but still far from God. I had to get around people that said, I think you can do it. I remember the very first time I came home, I was 19, I had just given my life to Christ, and I looked at my friend, he's my best friend in college, and I looked at him and said, man, listen, I'm new, I'm different. I prayed a prayer today in church, and I've given my life to Jesus Christ, and I'm going to serve him until I die. And I think, honestly, he wants me to be a pastor. And I don't know how to do it, but one of these days, I think I'm going to start a church like the one I was in today. And you know what he said to me? He said, I don't think you're nice enough. to do something like that. And I believed him. And I walked out of there and I just put the dream down for a little while. And then I had a pastor one day at 24 pull me to the side and say, there's something in you that is different than I've ever seen in anybody else. I think you have an ability to walk into a city and gather people in a way that I've never experienced before. Would you teach other people how to have that? And I'm sitting there going, okay, the label that my roommate put on me was you're not good enough to do it. And then this guy comes and puts a new label on me, and I said, I ain't walking with that brother anymore. I got to get somebody that's going to help me chase the dream. You want to start a business. You want to start a small group. You want to start, and then immediately the people in your life, they will either be a catalyst or a crutch. I want the people in my life that are going to look at me and say, hey, I think you ought to dream a little bigger than what you just said. I got to find the right people to share it with. Let me give you this from a doctor named Dean Ornish. He did a study on relationship. This is huge. He said, having a friend to whom you can disclose your feelings is a major determinant of well-being. People with friends are statistically healthier. They're less likely to get common colds, to develop fatal coronary disease, develop physical impairments or reductions in brain function as they age. People with friends are more likely to survive the death of a spouse without any permanent loss of vitality. I am not aware of any other factor, not diet, not smoking, not exercise, not stress, not genetics, not drugs, not surgery, that has a greater impact on our incident of illness and chance of premature death than whether or not a person has close, meaningful friendships. Who's in your life? Show me your inner circle, and I will show you a picture of your future. The reason I've traveled the world and planting churches, the reason I've preached all over the globe, I've seen God do things that I can't explain to you today. And it's because the people that I run with are people like your pastor. I don't spend a lot of time anymore these days with anybody that's not willing to help me chase the dream. So you got to find the right friends to share it with. The second thing you've got to do is you've got to know your value. I am so saddened to look in a church and in churches all over the world where I stand on platforms and look at people that feel like, man, well, it's a good thing we got pastor because he got some value. Good thing we got somebody to sing a couple songs because they got some value. And you don't understand that when God formed Moses and when God formed Noah and when God formed Peter and when God formed Paul, He did not spend one more second. He did not devote any more attention to them than He did in the moment that He was fashioning you. Do you understand that? And the reason that we always kind of like sit and go, oh yeah, you just honestly don't believe it. We have a value problem. I know my value. Ephesians 2:10 says that God prepared. I am His handiwork. He was glad when He made me. He knows the hairs on my head. And the Bible says that He created works in advance for me to do. He didn't just make me. He made me for a job. And I know my value. And so while I'm here on this earth for however long God has me, I'm going to live out that value. You don't have less value than me. It's the same. He made us in the same way, with the same attention and with the same passion. But in your life, there are going to be people that try to help determine your worth for you. That's why your circle is so important. When you look at the life of Joseph, look what happened. His family, Genesis 37:3, it said, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children. His family had determined his value. Look, because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But know this, your family doesn't determine your worth. His daddy said, hey, you're pretty valuable, kid. Here's a jacket. I'm more valuable than a jacket. Nice pair of shoes, perhaps. He said, here's a jacket, but listen, I need you to understand something. Your family doesn't determine your value. I see so many people that they are looking back to a previous generation to determine their dream for a future one. And they're saying, hey, Mom, Dad, do I have value? How many young people I talk to that are getting degrees in areas where they have no interest so that their mom and dad will finally tell them they're proud of them? Listen, I don't need your jacket. I don't need your jacket. I was made on purpose and for a purpose. Now listen, I'm not saying walking out in rebellion or being a knucklehead, but they don't determine your value. That is a predetermined amount that's not set by where you come from. Listen, if you're like me and you come from a hot mess of a family, praise God. Your family does not determine your value. If my family got to determine my value, there's not a gas station in the world that I couldn't manage. Some of y'all get that in a minute. They still try to remind me in the moments where the devil allows them to speak into my ear of who I was and who I used to be, because they don't like the fact that I decided to become a new thing. Your job doesn't determine your worth. I get around a lot of people. I travel the world. You get around behind their name, it looks like an eye chart. There's so many DD and DDD, PhD, APB. I don't know. I don't have a LMNOP. So you got to understand, Joseph was sold into slavery. And then he got bought by a guy named Potiphar. And even in that moment, Potiphar, in his work, tried to determine his value. He said, listen, Joseph was a handsome, well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife began to look at him lustfully. And she said, come sleep with me, she demanded, but he refused. And he said, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one has more authority than I do. He has held nothing back from me except for you. His boss, his job had tried to determine his value. Hey, listen, we're proud of you. We're glad you went to school. We're glad you went and got a great job, but that's not your value. I sit on a lot of airplanes, and I have people ask me this all the time. Hey, what do you do? And just so you know, when you ask people that and they're a pastor, it is the moment where they have to decide whether or not they're going to lie to you. Just so you know. Like, I have to go, okay, God, can I lie to them? And I'll repent later, I promise. Because I just want to, because one of two things always happens when you tell them that you're a pastor. They either getting ready to tell you how they don't believe that Christianity is real, or you just signed yourself up for a free 2-hour counseling session. And Bose can't cancel that noise. And people always ask me the exact same thing. What do you do? What do you do? What they're trying to determine is, what's your worth? My job doesn't determine my worth. My family doesn't determine my worth. My job doesn't determine my worth. And the world doesn't determine your worth. Pharaoh looks at Joseph after 13 years of his life in prison and separated from his family and says, hey, listen, I'm going to make you a big deal around here. So I'm going to give you some stuff to let everybody know that you have value. See, yesterday you had a loincloth and you sat down in a prison and you had no value. But today I'm going to put some things on you and I'm going to let the world know that you finally have arrived, that you're finally worth something. And he says, and Pharaoh said, since God has revealed the meaning of my dreams to you, clearly no one else is intelligent or as wise as you are. So you're going to be in charge of my court. And all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a higher rank than you. And Pharaoh said, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh removed his ring from his hand, and he put it on Joseph's finger. And he dressed him in fine linen clothing, and he hung a gold chain around his neck. He wanted the world to know, hey, he finally has value. He didn't finally have value. Your world, your value in this world is not determined by what someone puts on you, but by what God has done in you. In Potiphar's house, he was accused of rape falsely. He was sold into slavery because he had a dream. He was separated from his family. He was told he was common and he was ordinary. His entire life, everybody tried to put the wrong label on him. When they saw a rapist, God saw a man of integrity. When they saw a spoiled kid, God saw a redeemer of a people. When they saw a slave, God saw someone he would use to save. When they saw a stranger, God saw a restorer of a family. Your value isn't determined by the rings you wear and the necklace you have on and what the world says is valuable and the car you drive and the house you live in. We put our value in the things that aren't going to save us. When God looks at you, He says, I made you on purpose and for a purpose. I have plans for you, and you got to get the dream back. You got to get the dream back. Don't waste your time. And some of you would say, man, I'm too old. My day's already passed. Hey, listen, as long as you are on this side of the grass, I have searched my Bible front and back. I cannot find a heavenly retirement plan. Get in the game. Some of you say, I'm too young. I'm just too young. I'll help eventually. Hey, let me tell you right now. There's not a better time to get in the game than today. We give yesterday too much power and tomorrow has none. Today is the only day that I can do something to make a difference in the world. 70 years ago, men 13, 14, 15 years old would lie about their age so that they could go into war to fight for our nation. Now we got 28-year-old men just living at the house playing games all night. You forgot the dream. Living in a world with grown boys instead of grown men. You got to get the dream back. You were made for something. But the problem is, you don't understand your value. Nobody's got to tell me of my value. See, my world told me that I was uneducated. God said, you're an ambassador. My world told me you're broken, and God said you are redeemed. My world told me that you wouldn't amount to anything because of where you come from. And God said where you come from never had any determination of the dream that I put in your heart. You got to get the dream back. One of these days you're going to stand up in front of Jesus, and your friends won't be there. And I won't be there. And your pastor won't be there. And he's going to ask, how'd you do with the dream? And my goal is for him to say, well done, good and faithful servant. You did it. So we got to get the right people around us. We got to begin to know our value and wrestle that to the ground. Then we got to do it together. Number 3, you got to do it together. Hey, listen, the reason that there's always all these parachurch organizations that have to crop up all over the world is because we didn't understand that the local church was always big enough to carry the dream that was in your heart. You don't have to go take it somewhere else. So listen, if time, money, education, experience, current commitments weren't an issue and you were guaranteed not to fail, what would you do? I had a lady one time tell me there wouldn't be an orphan left in the world. I'd take care of them. And I said, then start a small group where you begin to minister to those needs. Start it right now. Start a group. Why are you waiting? God told me, man, I grew up without a dad. I would love to get around young men and just let them know they have value and teach them how to be a man. I'm like, start a group. Start a group today. You don't have to go start some parachurch thing outside of the church. It was big enough. The dream of this church is big enough for your dream to live inside of it. It was created to be a catalyst for your dream. It's not here so you can help accomplish Stephen's dream. He created a church so that you could live out yours. That's the dream of this house. So you got to do it together. The fourth thing I will tell you is you better expect opposition. The problem with most of our dreams is we take 3 steps and then we fall and we say, oh my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He said, listen, first world Christian problems. You don't work for about 4 minutes chasing down the gospel. There are 10 Christians killed every hour on the hour, every hour for the last decade for their faith. And we go, but God, I thought you called me to be a pastor, but now they want me to be here at about 8:30. Hey, you better expect some opposition. John 16, this one doesn't go up on your fridge a lot. He said, I've told you these things so that in me you could have peace. But hey, in this world, you're going to have a problem. In this world, you will have trouble. Take heart. I have overcome the world. In Genesis, the Bible says that when he was in Potiphar's house, he was a slave, and the Bible calls him a success in everything that he did. And then Potiphar threw him into jail, and then the Bible called him a success in everything that he did. Success isn't determined by your status in the world. Your success is determined by your obedience to God. You just stay faithful and be fruitful. And so the last thing that I would tell you that you're going to have to figure out how to do is you're going to have to figure out, number 5, how to travel light. You can't be a dream chaser and be great at carrying baggage. See, I got to run too fast. I got too many dreams. I got too many goals, too many ideas that I'm trying to chase down in my life. I can't carry all my baggage from yesterday. I got to put some stuff down. So there's a few people that you need to let off the hook today. You said, oh, man. The first, people who hurt you on purpose. The people that actually meant to hurt you. They designed for it. They meant that Facebook post. Okay? The specifically non-specific Facebook post. You know what I'm talking about? Where you never use a name, you never tag anybody, but everybody in the world know who you're talking about? Just sitting here, think about how much I hate when people eat my sandwich out the fridge at work. I'm like, we know who you're talking about. They still got crumbs on their mouth. You got to let people off the hook that honestly meant to hurt you. Joseph looked at his brothers years later, and he had a chance to kill them. He had a chance to let them starve to death and die. But he knew that even though he had been thrown in the pit, and even though he had lived a season in the prison, that he would never experience freedom in the palace until he let them go. There's nothing worse than walking around as a free man and still in prison. And unforgiveness is like drinking poison every day, waiting for the other person to die. And so he said, I'm going to let you off the hook, you that hurt me on purpose. Hey, and then the second group you got to let off the hook the people that actually hurt you on accident. They didn't mean it. And then you got to let off the hook you. Hey, yeah, you blew it. And I get there's a thin line between Saturday night and Sunday morning. And you made some mistakes. But today, it's time to let you off the hook. Quit reminding yourself of who you used to be before you met Jesus. And say, God, however you can use a person, use me. Whatever you can do through a man, do it through me. Whatever you can do through a woman, whatever you can do through a family, whatever you can do through a church. I looked at my dad. I was 19 years old. We hadn't seen each other for over a decade. And at that point in my life, I was a broken shell of a human. I said, Dad, I got no job. I got no money. Girlfriend just broke up with me. And I'm literally a country music song. I said, I got no education. I got no worth. I'm nobody. I'm not the person I set out to be, and I don't know how to get there. I got no stuff. I got no friends. I got no future. And I'll never forget, he looked at me, and with a tear running down his face, he held his arms out, and he said, yeah, I know, son, but you're mine. And your Heavenly Father today needs you to hear something. Hey, yeah, you don't have the money you thought you'd have. You don't have the stuff you thought you had. You haven't accomplished the things that you thought you'd accomplish. But He's looking at you and says, I want you to get the dream back because I'm the one who gave it to you in the first place. And I never want you to forget that you're mine. You're mine.